So you have 20 minutes.
Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, the jurist and panelist. I'm afraid there are a couple of minutes here, but nonetheless, for the limit allocated to me of 20 minutes and considering it's already taken place so far, we'll skip reading through the written part of the thesis, which is already circulated, and I will go explaining the explanation, if I may, in the short period of time that has been allocated to me. You see, to begin with, it'll be very good for us to understand what is economics. And when I have reflected on this, I have come to the conclusion that it relates to our planet, it relates to the people who inhabit the planet, which are 6.93 billion. They constitute what we call the consumers, and the planet itself is available for these consumers to use, to utilize, and make good. So, this particular faculty of economics has been on midstream, as we see in our day. And since the principle, cornerstone of my regular papers have been the reversion to our ideology, it was incumbent upon me to reflect upon what our ideology, i.e. Islam, has to say about the consumers, our status, and the nature, i.e. the planet on which we live and which we use for consumption, for our food, for our clothing, for our abodes, and for other things. Now, this legal definition, like every other terminology which is used in economics in our day and age, has to be defined constitutionally, has to be legislated, and has to be part of how we view economics from our perspective. It is a good fortune for us to have a jury here comprising of very senior judges who will best be able to comment on this subsequently, because the objectives resolution, which is part of our constitution, alone does not make up for Islamizing the economic systems which are prevalent on the planet. We are following an order. I mean, we are following what we call the New World Order. We are following economics for whatever it is being dished out to us, without really reflecting on our status. There are basically two things to define here. The Commonwealth of Nature, which is being used, and the consumers. What is our status? By what I understand, and what I have researched, and what I have put on this printed paper before you, is simply this much, that whatever the population are equal owners of the Commonwealth of Nature provided to us by Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, i.e. the planet. To give you an example where the disparity lies, where the injustice lies, I would like to quote to you a figure. The total surface area of the planet, for instance, is 510,065,600 square kilometers. And if we simply divide this by 6.93 billion people which inhabit this earth, then individually we should all be owners of 73,602 square meters of global surface, which we are not. And should we be given the right to own this, then our right automatically gets established as equity holders of the planet to be able to determine our course forward. If we work on the same analogy and move forward and look at our own territory in the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, we will see another astounding figure that our population stands at 174.5 million people, while surface area of the globe which is being occupied by us is only 796,096 square kilometers. So apparently we've been robbed by about 11,709,000 odd square kilometers of global space. Now this is the disparity which does exist insofar as land is concerned. Then we come down to labor. Because when we have to define the people who are inhabiting this particular planet, we also need a definition for labor. So as equity holders, we are deprived of our total holding as it ought to be. This is why Islam does not recognize political territories. When it comes to labor, there is no equity in the medium of exchange we call money. I mean, a person digging a hole in a desert in the United States gets a certain amount of money, while a man doing the same labor with the same skills in Pakistan will get probably 86 times less or still lesser. So the fundamental presentation right now in today's paper is the liberation of land and the liberation of labor. And number 3, it is the equity in the medium of exchange we call money, which has to be viewed. Now, while this is the premise, when I sat down to write out this particular paper, I divided the paper into 2 parts. One, because this is not a class for economics, I'm not going to be teaching you calculus here, or I'm not going to be telling you statistical data. The paper is divided into 2 parts. One, that all factors of economics, all factors of production, all factors of consumption, and the status of the consumer have to be legally defined and made part of our constitution. They have to be legislated, and this is fundamental, because on this will depend the politics of the country, on this will depend the future planning that this particular population can aspire to have. On this will depend the decisions which are made for governance. On this will depend the roadmap, the economic roadmap and the destination for a country like ourselves. The second part of my paper relates to, as a consequence of legal measures which need to be legislated, deals with the various reforms we need to address to be able to achieve true independence, to be able to protect our sovereignty, to be able to have a place of respect in the community of nations of the planet. So insofar as the first part of the paper is concerned, I have already expressed to you my my observations and my research insofar as legislation is concerned, because unless this is done, we will keep politicizing amongst ourselves. We will keep playing the blame game. But we must realize, in effect, that the real fault lies with the legal structure for economics in the document we call our Constitution, by which we are running and governing this country. And economics is right now the cornerstone of global politics. So as we see, as we view our plight today, I would like to quote a couplet which comes to my mind recurrently after hearing Mirza out with the beautiful poetry, which was more like a dua, like a prayer. I recall a couplet, and I think the alien here will be able to probably confirm who the poet is. I think it is Mir. कि कितने सादा हैं कि बीमार हुए जिनके सबब उसी अवतार के लौंडे से दवा लेते हैं. We are in a bad shape, but we keep going back recurrently pleading for money. This is not the way an economic setup ought to be run. This is not how, like the Americans would put it, get a railroad going. And if I have been able to communicate to you my basic reservations and my basic observation on the first part of the paper, I would like, because of the limitation of time, move swiftly on to the measures that I have proposed in this paper. You see, friends, I would like to also introduce to you a certain term, which in this paper has been called equity abuse. And this equity abuse primarily is that we do not have the land which our population deserves. We do not have the liberty of labor because of international protocols which we are signatories to. And therefore, we have a medium of exchange which is declassed. And that is why the legal definition of particularly where a consumer with equity on the planet stands, what ought to be his holding and what ought to be his right in being able to choose who and how he is governed is fundamental for judicial activism insofar as economics is concerned. Now, if we move on swiftly to the package of what ought to be done to mitigate this particular problem, we'll have to view the four factors of production: land, labor, capital, enterprise. These again need definition. In my opinion, and let's not say my opinion so much as in my research, the status of land essentially cannot be freehold. You have the only freehold land is what comes to you by virtue of your birthright on the planet. But that is got to be shared with everybody else who lives on the planet. Therefore, whatever land is utilized by you has to be paid for in continuity to the state, for the lack of a better term, or to society on a continual basis. Similarly, labor. No labor can be captive and without compensation. And the categories of labor are limited to the individual levels of civilization, which are one's mental and physical skills. This needs clear definition as well. Capital is a consequence of labor input based on a medium of exchange that is free of disparity whatsoever, and therefore money is a measure of labor and not a commodity. Today, money is being used as a commodity. And if we take the US dollar as an example, then we will see that that printed paper does not have a very fancy picture on it though, but that printed paper is not even backed by real assets. It is backed by the barrel of the gun. So equity in capital or in the medium of exchange is fundamental to being able to achieve our own, or being able to implement our own doctrine. And the fourth factor of production, i.e. enterprise, represents the free will of man, which addresses the ethos of his being. He identifies the needs, invents, produces, and proliferates after research. This is the cornerstone of human survival and the marvel of self-respecting right of existence. It cannot be compromised. Today, this particular aspect of enterprise is regulated again by international protocols. And it reminds me again of something which I saw probably in an Indian movie, that if they do it, if they do something, if they commit themselves to any form of enterprise, it is considered as marvelous. And if we do it, it is considered as an act which is in breach of the will of the international community. Now this has to be also legislated. Having gone beyond the factors of legislation, the factors of legal definition, we can then address the measures. I propose, therefore, the following measures. Number one, that we must look inwards instead of looking outwards for sustenance. There should be an absolute ban on borrowing. There is no such thing as borrowing. No nation has ever risen to any position of respect as a consequence of borrowing. It is a plague. It is like cancer. It is disrespectful. It is not even logical. And if we don't stop picking up finance ministers who are ex-city bankers, with all due respect to any city banker sitting here, we will sink further. This has to come to an end. We have to look inwards. We have to find a place of respectability from the resources we have. And mind you, the resources we have been put on this piece of paper printed before you. These are the statistics which I managed to pick up, on which we can rely upon, and they are sufficient. They are sufficient to feed a population of 1 billion people. We are only 174 million. So let's not be naive. Let's roll up our sleeves, get down, work, and rise. We must seek to establish an economic quid pro quo with the rest of the world. Because And that can only happen if you have your own roadmap, if you have your own destination. Your destination is your independence, is your independently being able to manage your resources for your population. We must seek to ascetize the commonwealth of nature in our political jurisdiction. And needless my saying, what we hold right now, which probably the research of Mr. Saad Amanullah sitting here on the panel has made a great contribution in being able to tell us what this country holds. But just to give you an idea, we have about 185 billion tons of natural gas. And we have, I beg your pardon, coal, and then we have trillion CFT of gas and reserves of 352 million tons of copper. And there are other resources which are not even tapped. Then we have a lot of land which is good for agriculture. We have water resources. We have the biggest human resource with us. We have people who have with them the ability to build a country, to build our industry, to build our own area of independent place in the community of nations. My most important reform which is being suggested today is urbanization. According to the Surveyor General of Pakistan, there are 3,403 pockets of population in this country. And I'd like you to use your vision. Please walk with me and see if you can understand what I'm saying. If these pockets of population are urbanized on a vertical basis throughout the country, and I mean vertical basis for the provision of power, for the provision of food, for the provision of water, for the provision of education, medical care, and we decentralize, we do fiscal decentralization, then you will be able to graduate the volume of production and you will be able to graduate the volume of consumption, and you will be able to give a vertical growth to your industry in the country. I suggest this for Pakistan, where we make an unusual political territory, if you like. We have multiracial populations here. We have variety of languages spoken here. And we are supposed to be bonded by an ideology for Islam. Well, let's just go for it. Let's put it to test. Let's legislate. Let's get bonded by that. Should we go for urbanization? It is my submission. Then, the provincial demarcations will become cultural boundaries. And the three-tier or three parallel economies that we have in the country, one of the armed forces, one of the bureaucracy, and one of the wretched people, will come on an equal plane, because there'll be laws that will determine how you commit yourself to enterprise and industrialization in this country. These urban units can also become political constituencies in the future. And they will help unite a very, very politically polarized population that exists. From the economic point of view, should we do this, then we can also move towards the optimal utilization of our political territory as exists by making what we might refer to as corporate Pakistan. These urban units can become companies which can be quoted on the stock exchange. The rest of the land can be utilized for industrialization or agricultural purposes. And we can introduce corporate farming. If the land utilization is committed on the basis or on a motto that not a single inch of our land will be non-productive, then viewing the Ketu Mountains in the north or viewing the green turtles in the south will all generate an income which will keep the wheel of the economy moving, in fact sprinting. Another very important feature of the reform that I seek is land revenue. You see, we are following a taxation pattern here which was led by the colonists. If the Khandoon 600 years ago made an observation that overtaxation kills the incentive to labor. This is there, documented in his Muqaddimah. And an advisor to the State Bank of Pakistan, an ex-advisor, Mr. Merchant, observed that if honestly somebody has to pay taxes in Pakistan, of all the taxes that are there legally, then he will end up paying 105 rupees for every 100 rupees of his income. We are neither following Ibn Khaldun, we are not following Merchant. We have a taxation system which is there, and some of these rules and regulations exist from the 1800s. I suggest for your consideration, and I submit that land revenue, in my limited research, is about the only levy that can be levied on the Muslim population to fund the operations of government. Should you take the productivity index and should you analyze the cost, the amount of revenue which we collect today to run government from the present budget, then the 56% population that exists in the country, which are laborers, you've got one of the youngest labor forces anywhere on the planet, will need to pay only 2 rupees 61 paisa per square meter per annum. And I see no reason why we should start taxing income, we should start taxing our freedom to move, our freedom to transport, our freedom to produce, above all. Since we have the youngest labor force in the country, I have also sought that an effective social security plan be put into place. Because we are a country where the land is not accurately demarcated. We do not have down to the last inches you have probably in Switzerland. The head count, which is our labor force, it is no count because there are political deterrents. And therefore, if you have the youngest labor force, you have to have the social security plan for the unemployed. And you have to have your doors open for industrialization so that the unemployed do get employed, either in the field of agriculture or in the field of mining or in the field of mechanical or electrical production. there is another thing. In the developed world, an aspect of standardization has played a very, very significant role. Whether there are roles, there is a sewage system, there is an educational system, there are building standards. For everything you engineer, everything you convert the commonwealth of nature to a product which is consumable, you need to fix and determine standards. You have Pakistan Standards Institute. I recommend that standardization should be taken up as a formal activity, and the ministry should be there to regulate everything that is being produced or everything that is being dispensed, including services in the country. That will cause uniformity all over, and that will kill the current environment of substandard production. The last point which I have made in my paper is fiscal and administrative decentralization with a strong centralized audit to maintain standards, so that we can use our natural and human resources and to link them to complete transparency. This is all I have to present for the moment. And I must close my speech by this last statement which I had written down earlier, that we must seek a world independent of us instead of our remaining dependent on the world. I thank you all for your time.